The candles had barely been lit when Alina Whitmore realized every eye in the room was measuring her against the other women and finding her lacking. She stood near the edge of the ballroom in her late mother's blue gown, her neck and wrists bare while diamonds and pearls glittered on everyone around her. A cluster of young ladies near the punch table glanced at her, then whispered behind gloved hands, their laughter sharp enough to sting even from a distance. Alina kept her chin level and her hands folded, refusing to let her face show what their words had done. She had come to this ball because her father insisted the invitation could not be refused, not because she expected to be noticed, admired, or remembered. The Whitmore name opened doors just wide enough to let her in, never wide enough to make her matter. Across the room, a group of matrons leaned together, murmuring that the merchant's daughter had worn nothing to declare her worth, as though a woman's value could be measured in stone and metal. Alina heard fragments of their words and let them pass over her like wind against a closed window. She had learned long ago that explaining herself to people who had already decided her place rarely changed anything. The orchestra began a new piece, and couples swept onto the floor in a wash of silk and candlelight, leaving Alina standing alone near a marble pillar, watching without bitterness, only quiet patience. She told herself this evening would end like every other one, with polite nods and forgettable conversation, and then a carriage ride home under a sky full of stars that cared nothing for ballroom gossip. What she could not have known was that somewhere across that same glittering room, a tall man in a dark coat had already noticed her, and had, in fact, come to this exact house on this exact night for no other reason than to find her. He was not scanning the crowd for a bride chosen by rank or fortune. He was searching for a face he had carried in his memory for 3 long years, a face he feared he might never see again. Alina shifted her weight and glanced toward the tall windows, wondering how many more hours remained before she could politely take her leave. She did not notice the man's gaze settle on her for a long moment, then sharpen with something between disbelief and hope. She did not notice him set down his glass, straighten his coat, and begin walking in her direction with a purpose the rest of the room could not miss. All she noticed was the sudden hush spreading outward like ripples on still water, conversations halting mid-sentence, heads turning one by one toward the same point across the floor. Alina frowned, uncertain what had caused such a stir, and turned to see what everyone else was already staring at. 3 years earlier, on a road far from any ballroom, a carriage wheel had cracked against a hidden stone, throwing its lone traveler into the mud beside a narrow country lane. Nathaniel had been traveling without his title that day, dressed as an ordinary gentleman, hopping to see the countryside without the weight of rank following him everywhere he went. When his driver could not free the broken wheel, Nathaniel found himself stranded as evening approached, cold rain beginning to fall, with no house or inn in sight. It was a young woman on her way home from the market who stopped her small cart and offered help without hesitation. She did not ask his name or his business. She simply climbed down, examined the damaged wheel with practical hands, and directed her own driver to help pull the carriage free of the mud. She gave Nathaniel a blanket from her cart and refused any payment, saying only that anyone would have done the same. They spoke for perhaps 20 minutes while the wheel was repaired, and in that short time, Nathaniel found himself more at ease than he had felt in years surrounded by court and title. She spoke plainly, laughed easily, and asked nothing of him beyond simple conversation about the weather and the harvest. When the repairs were finished, she wished him safe travels and turned her cart back toward home before he could properly thank her, let alone learn her name. Nathaniel called after her, but she was already too far down the lane, and darkness was falling fast. He returned to his estate days later, unable to stop thinking about the woman who had helped a stranger expecting nothing in return. As months passed, that memory did not fade the way most memories do. Instead, it grew sharper, more insistent, until Nathaniel found himself sending quiet inquiries to villages along that same road, asking after a young woman with dark hair and a small blue cart. Most inquiries led nowhere. Some led to disappointment. A few led to women who resembled his memory but were not her. Nathaniel began to wonder if he had imagined the entire encounter, if loneliness had shaped a stranger into something more meaningful than she truly was. Then, only weeks ago, an old servant mentioned in passing that a merchant family named Whitmore lived near that same stretch of countryside, and that their daughter had once been known to help travelers on the road. Nathaniel had felt something settle in his chest that night, a certainty he had not allowed himself to feel in years. When the invitation to Lord Ashbourne's ball arrived, listing the Whitmore family among expected guests, Nathaniel cancelled every other engagement without explanation. Tonight, he was not attending as a duke expected to consider marriage among ranked families. Tonight, he had come for one reason only, and he intended to find her before the night ended. Nathaniel crossed the ballroom floor with a steadiness that drew attention from every corner of the room, though he seemed entirely unaware of the stairs following him. Whispers rippled outward as guests turned to see where the Duke of Carlingford was walking, and confusion spread when his path led not toward any of the celebrated beauties near the dance floor, but toward the quiet corner where Alina stood beside a marble pillar. Alina noticed the sudden shift in the room before she understood its cause. Conversations dimmed, fans stopped moving, and dozens of eyes swept toward her with open curiosity. She glanced behind herself, certain the attention must belong to someone else, but there was no one there. When she turned back, the tall man in the dark coat had nearly reached her, his expression unreadable, his pace unhurried but certain. He stopped before her and offered a bow that seemed almost formal, though something in his eyes suggested this greeting mattered to him far more than protocol required. Alina curtsied out of habit, uncertain what to say to a man she did not recognize, a man whose presence had silenced an entire ballroom simply by walking across it. He asked, quietly, whether she remembered a broken carriage wheel on a rainy afternoon 3 years past, and a stranger who had been grateful for a blanket and a kind word. For a moment, Alina's mind returned to that afternoon, a memory she had not thought of in years, buried beneath countless ordinary days since. She remembered a stranded traveler, polite and soaked through, whom she had helped without a second thought before hurrying home ahead of the storm. She had never learned his name either, and had assumed their paths would never cross again. Now, standing before her in fine clothing and unmistakable bearing, she realized the stranger from that road and the Duke everyone in this room feared and admired were the very same person. Her breath caught, and for a moment she could not find words. Around them, the whispers grew louder, guests straining to hear what could possibly connect the Duke of Carlingford to a merchant's daughter no one had thought worth noticing an hour earlier. Alina felt heat rise in her cheeks, unsure whether it came from embarrassment or something closer to disbelief. Nathaniel, watching her expression shift from confusion to recognition, allowed himself a small, relieved smile, the first genuine smile he had shown all evening. He told her plainly that he had spent 3 years searching for the woman who helped him that day, never expecting to find her wearing nothing more than kindness and a plain blue gown at a ball meant for jewels and titles. Alina, still struggling to steady her voice, admitted she never imagined that stranger had been a duke, let alone one who would cross an entire ballroom simply to speak with her again. Word of the exchange spread through the ballroom faster than any dance could carry it, and within minutes, Alina found herself the center of attention she had never sought and did not know how to manage. Women who had whispered cruelly about her plain gown now studied her with open curiosity, some smiling as though they had always admired her, others narrowing their eyes with poorly hidden jealousy. A few young ladies who had ignored her all evening suddenly appeared at her side, offering compliments about her gown, her posture, her composure, as though attention from the Duke had transformed qualities that existed in her all along. Alina remained polite, though she recognized the shift for what it was, a room deciding her worth based entirely on someone else's interest rather than anything she herself had done. Nathaniel remained close by her side, his manner calm but protective, clearly unwilling to let the sudden crowd overwhelm her. When one bold matron suggested loudly that she herself had introduced Alina to the Duke earlier that evening, Nathaniel corrected her without hesitation, stating plainly that he had come to this ball for one reason only, to find the woman he remembered, and that no introduction had been necessary or given. His words silenced the false claim immediately, and Alina felt a quiet gratitude for his honesty, delivered without anger, simply as fact. As the evening continued, Alina noticed how differently people spoke to her now, how doors that had seemed closed an hour earlier suddenly stood open. Yet she found herself troubled rather than flattered by the change, aware that her value in their eyes had shifted overnight not because of anything she had proven, but because a powerful man had chosen to notice her. She wondered whether any of these new admirers would have spoken to her at all had Nathaniel not crossed the room first. Nathaniel seemed to sense her unease, and during a quiet pause in the music, he suggested they step outside to the balcony, away from the crowd and its shifting opinions. Alina agreed, grateful for the chance to breathe air untouched by whispered judgment. As they walked together toward the tall glass doors, the room watched them go, already reshaping its stories about what this meeting meant and what it might become. Alina glanced back once at the ballroom full of jewels and ambition, then let the cool night air replace the noise behind her. The balcony was quiet, lit only by moonlight and the faint golden glow spilling from the ballroom windows behind them. Alina stood at the stone railing, finally able to breathe without a dozen eyes measuring her every movement. Nathaniel joined her, close but respectful, watching the gardens below rather than pressing her for conversation she was not ready to give. After a long moment, he spoke, telling her plainly that he had never forgotten the kindness she showed a stranded stranger who could offer her nothing in return. He explained that in his world, generosity was rarely offered without expectation, and that her simple, unguarded honesty on that muddy road had stayed with him longer than any grand gesture ever could. Alina listened, feeling the weight of his words settle gently rather than heavily, and admitted that she had thought of him occasionally over the years, wondering if their paths might somehow cross again, though she had never truly believed they would. Nathaniel turned to face her fully, his expression open in a way that surprised her, given how carefully guarded he had seemed inside the crowded ballroom. He told her he had not come tonight searching for a bride chosen by wealth or title, but for the one woman whose kindness had never depended on knowing who he was. Alina felt something steady and warm settle in her chest as she realized the truth of his words matched the sincerity in his eyes. She admitted quietly that she had worn no jewels tonight because she owned none worth wearing, and had never imagined that absence would matter to anyone in that glittering room. Nathaniel smiled and told her it had never mattered to him at all, that no diamond or pearl in that entire ballroom could have made her more visible than she already was the moment he saw her standing quietly by the pillar. The two of them remained on the balcony a while longer, speaking freely now, without the weight of watching eyes or whispered judgment pressing against them. When they finally returned to the ballroom, arm in arm, the room fell silent once more, though this time Alina did not shrink from the attention. She walked beside Nathaniel with quiet confidence, understanding at last that her worth had never depended on jewels, rank, or the opinions of a crowded room. She had been seen, truly seen, by the one person whose recognition mattered most, and that certainty carried her forward into whatever the future now held for them both.